Chapter 18, 24 Hours in Nowhere, 10 o'clock a.m. Nowhere Elementary sucked, that was for sure, and our health class was just as pathetic as everything else. We had exactly one ancient, creepy, dirty dummy that had tasted the chapped lips of 1,000 scruffy Nowhere children for the whole school to practice CPR on. That meant a lot of waiting around while kids pretended to French kiss it, lick its nose, poke its rubber breasts, massage its head, pretty much everything you can imagine except to give it CPR. When it was my one and only turn, being the total geek that I am, I actually performed CPR on the dummy. This was met with cries of teacher's pet and goody goody. I felt for the end of Rossi's breastbone. I placed 2 fingers at the tip and pressed the heel of my hand above that. I remembered Mr. Johnson telling us to use a lot of pressure and to not worry about breaking the person's ribs. Better to break her ribs than for her to... As I pressed into her chest with all the strength in me, I heard Jessie crying from the water. "Don't die, Rossi, don't die!" Die? Rossi could die. My world sucked pretty bad. Take Rossi out of it, and the level of suckness was unimaginable. Matthew hovered over me as the flashlight burned out in his hands. I tilted Rossi's head back and pinched her nose with my fingers. I placed my mouth over hers and blew into it. I watched her chest in the faint light of the nearby opening. It rose and fell with every breath. Then I did more chest compressions. I tilted her head back once more, pinched her nose, and breathed into her. Just as Rossi had sworn she would never watch Beau hurt me again, I swore to myself I would not let her die. She couldn't die now. Not now. We had the gold. We were going to get her bike back. She was going to win. She was going to go to Breaker Bradley's. She would find a sponsor. She would get to Baja and do all 1,000 miles. Her life was not going to end down here. Not at 13 years old. Not in this cave. Not in this darkness. Not like this. I thought of her on the ledge under the full moon, telling me she hoped she died on her bike, telling me she didn't care whether she was here or not. Well, I cared. I cared whether she was here or not, and I cared enough for the both of us. Rossi coughed and gagged. I pushed her onto her side, and she threw up a gallon of water. Matthew fell to his knees beside me. He exhaled like he had been holding his breath. Rossi rolled onto her back, grasping for air. When her breathing finally evened out, I helped her into a sitting position. She fell back against me. "I told you I'd make it," she said in a hoarse whisper. "Gus saved your life, Rossi." Matthew wiped at his nose. "You almost died." I couldn't see her face. She didn't speak. "Could someone please help me out of the water?" Jessie cried from under the helmet. "I think a shrimp is trying to eat my exploded foot, and it hurts bad." Matthew hauled him up onto the ledge, and he cried out in pain as his foot grazed the side. He crawled on all fours to Rossi, still holding the pocket watch in his hand. "Are you okay?" She nodded slightly. "I just need a minute to catch my breath." Matthew took a few shaky breaths as he composed himself. Then he walked over to where the light was coming out of the ceiling, hunched down so he didn't hit his head, and looked up. "There's a hole up there, but it's going to be hard to get to. We'll have to push ourselves up using the sides, and it looks like there are bushes growing over it. Hopefully there's no cactus." Matthew scowled. "I don't know how we'll get Jessie up, since he can't use his foot." "And Rossi?" "I'll make it," she said. "I'll be okay." "Yeah, I've heard that before," said Matthew. "You guys can come back for me," said Jessie. "No," Matthew said. "We're not leaving you here in the dark. We get out of here together. We're not leaving anyone behind." I left Rossi to check out the hole. "I think we can climb up." I glanced at the guys. "Anyone been rock climbing?" They shook their heads. "With someone at the top to help pull and someone down here to help push him up, I think we can get Jessie up without him having to use his foot too much." "Who goes first, then?" Matthew asked. "You should," I said. "You're the strongest. You can pull Jessie up, and Rossi and I can try to boost him up as far as possible. You okay with that?" I asked Jessie. He looked scared. "I guess I have to be." I crouched down so Matthew could climb on my back and get a grip inside the hole. "I can't pull myself up," he said. "I need to get higher." Rossi crawled over to us and crouched down. Matthew stepped on her and then climbed onto my shoulders. He was incredibly heavy, and I worried I would fall over. But then Rossi said, "You're strong, Gus." And I felt like she infused me with muscle power I didn't know I had. I stood up tall with Matthew on my shoulders. "I'm sorry, Gus," he said as he pulled himself up and stepped on my head. I resisted the urge to grunt and groan. We watched him climb up the hole, keeping himself from falling by pushing against one side with his legs, his back against the other side. He shimmied up that way and disappeared above us. Then his head reappeared in the opening. "I'm out," he called. We cheered, and Rossi hugged me. "The good news," Matthew said, "is these bushes moved easily, like they just blew into the hole." I frowned. "Is there bad news?" Matthew nodded. "I seem to be at the bottom of some kind of pit." Jessie groaned. "We'll never get out." "Don't worry," I told Jessie. "At least we'll be outside." "Yeah, so the sun can cook us to death," he whined. Rossi opened my backpack from behind and pulled out the empty pickle jar, miraculously still intact. Then she knelt down and filled it with lake water. That water will probably give us the plague or something," Jessie said. "Probably not the plague, but definitely the trots." "I know," she said. "We don't know how far we'll have to walk when we get out," I said. "It won't take long for the heat to kill us. We'll only drink if we absolutely have to." Rossi and I worked together to lift Jessie into the hole above us. He kept crying out in pain at every motion we made, and I rolled my eyes at Rossi. Matthew reached down and tried to help him pull up, but there was no way we could lift him high enough, even though he was on our shoulders. You're going to have to climb a little bit, I told him. I can't, Jesse cried. Yes, you can, I ordered him. Man up, Jesse. Jesse was quiet, obviously startled at my sudden authoritarian approach. You can do it, I told him again. He took a deep breath, gripped the sides of the hole, jumped off our shoulders, and pushed his feet against the wall. He cried out in pain, and I felt bad about having yelled at him. I looked up at Matthew. He was focused on Jesse. You can do it, he told him. You'll get through it. Jesse, it was the first time Matthew had ever called him that. Finally, he reached a point where Matthew could grab him and help pull him up. And then he was gone. Rossi looked at me. Gus, you go. I shook my head. No way. How are you going to get up without help? I shrugged. I'll figure something out, and if I don't, you guys can come back and get me after the race. She shook her head. No, I want you there. She touched my shredded pants and shirt. Then she looked down at her own clothing. Like Rapunzel. You're going to use your hair to pull me up? No, but that's the idea. We need something to make a rope. Our clothes? She nodded. Then I boosted her up into the hole. She threw her helmet up to Matthew, and I pushed her feet against his side, but she didn't move. After a few seconds, she dropped out of the hole. I managed to catch her, but fell back. I kept her from hitting the ground with my body. She shook her head. I'm so sorry, Gus. I got dizzy. You've been through a lot. Maybe we should wait so you can rest longer. I mean, you just nearly drowned. No, she pushed herself up. There's no time for that. She stood and swayed a little. I held on to her until she was steady. Then I helped boost her back up into the hole. I stood underneath her in case she fell again, but I could see the determination on her face as she pushed herself up the hole. She finally reached Matthew, and he pulled her up. I listened while she argued with Matthew and Jesse. They whined and groaned and finally relented. And then about 5 minutes later, a rope made out of boys' ripped-up jeans and T-shirts floated down to me. I jumped and gripped it. I heard Matthew grunt as he tried to hold my weight. I climbed with all my might. We'd never done rope climbing in school, but I found it wasn't as hard as I expected. I didn't have a whole lot of weight to pull up. Before long, I was completely in the hole and able to use the walls to rappel myself up the others. I climbed out of it, breathing heavily from the effort, shielded my eyes from the blinding sunlight, and tried to make out our situation. Matthew was in his underpants, but Jesse still had his jeans on. I guess because it was too painful for him to remove his shoes. Rossi was sitting on the ground, facing the wall of the deep pit we were in, like she had been put in time out. We quickly unraveled the rope, and the boys got dressed. When they had all their clothes on, Rossi was finally free to turn around. Jesse raised his spindly arms and flexed them. Sorry you missed the ultimate display of macho manliness, Rossi. She turned in a circle, inspecting the hole around us. Yes, I am too, she looked at me. You know, Gus, I think you look taller. I stood up straight. The truth was I felt taller, like I had grown 3 inches in that cave. Maybe I'd finally hit that elusive growth spurt everyone else seemed to have gone through except me. Then we faced the next obstacle on the course, getting out of the pit. What is this, some kind of sinkhole? I said. Rossi nodded. We'll have to climb somehow. I checked the pocket watch. It's almost 11 already. Rossi's face sunk. We'll never make it. Yes, we will, Matthew insisted. He grabbed at a rock sticking out at the side of the sinkhole and attempted to pull himself up. The rock broke free of the wall, and he tumbled to the ground. You're too heavy, I told him. I think you have to be the one to climb. Then I'll bring help back for you guys. Rossi shook her head. That's going to take too long. There's no way. I can do it, I told her. I'll be fast. I found another rock sticking out of the side of the wall and attempted to climb. I stepped on another rock that was only about 6 inches off the ground. I looked up, straining to reach a stick higher above. Gus, Rossi said. Shh, I told her. I'm trying to concentrate. Hey, Gus, Jesse said. You guys, I snapped. I have to focus. If only I could somehow get my foot up on the rock I was gripping with my hand. Then I could reach this root protruding several feet above. I probably have to dig out some kind of foothold. Maybe I could use one of the rocks like a pick or make a spear out of it. Gus, Rossi cried. I dropped down the 6 inches of progress I made and whipped around. What? Look, she said, pointing at a rope ladder that had rolled down the other side of the sinkhole. Mayor Hansen popped his head over the side. Yoo-hoo! What are you doing down there? Mayor Hansen, I called. We need help. Yep, I see Dad. Climb up. The four of us looked at one another and laughed. We were getting out. We were getting Rossi to the race. And for the first time in my life, I was excited to get back to nowhere. Don't forget. I stuck my hand out. Promise. The others placed their hands on mine. Then we climbed up Mayor Hansen's rope ladder. Jesse even made it without too much complaining. When I got to the top of the sinkhole, I gazed around, trying to make sense of where we were. I saw Mayor Hansen's quad nearby. What are you doing out here? I asked him, taking note of the supplies fastened to the four-wheeler, mostly different kinds of netting. Mayor Hansen shrugged. Just a little shrimp fishing before the race today. I gaped at him. You get your shrimp out of that lake? Wait, you know about that lake? There were different levels of disgust on everyone's faces. Rossi looked fairly horrified, whereas Matthew looked only slightly appalled, but also very amused. Jesse, on the other hand, looked like he had just seen a mutant albino shrimp the size of a cow burst up out of the ground. Jesse shrieked and might have even fallen over if Matthew hadn't been supporting him. You sell my mom mutant albino dead man cave shrimp? My mom makes mutant albino dead man cave shrimp tacos. He wheezed like he couldn't get enough air. Unfortunately, I had also indulged a time or two in Mrs. Navarro's mutant albino dead man cave shrimp tacos. I could tell from the look on Rossi's face that she'd eaten them as well. I mean, they were pretty tasty. and I hadn't died or anything. But still. What are you laughing about? Jessie yelled at Matthew. Mayor Hansen, Rossi said, you do realize you're selling shrimp you got out of a lake that has a dead body in it. Mayor Hansen waved a dismissive hand. They're all dimes of dead bodies in the ocean, and everybody's still eating crab legs. Rossi stared at him. So not the same thing? What are you kids doing out here anyway? Mayor Hansen adjusted his denim cutoffs. They were incredibly short and required a lot of adjusting. What you kids doing in the cave? Your parents know you out here. We all glanced at one another. We hadn't worked out a story to tell anyone. Did we need to work out a story? We all kind of shrugged. We won't tell if you won't, I said. Mayor Hansen shook his head. Not my business. He looked at his watch, then at Rossi. Why you not getting ready for the race? Rossi stepped forward. Mayor Hansen, how far is it back to town? Mile and a half. Can you fit us on your quad? He removed his giant cowboy hat and scratched at his perfectly coiffed hair. He frowned. I fit maybe one. Rossi looked at me, then at Jessie and Matthew. Go, Rossi, Jessie said. You need to get your bike and get to the race. No. Rossi turned to Mayor Hansen. Jessie needs to get to a doctor. Can you drive him back? Mayor Hansen nodded. Of course. You kids have water? We all shook our heads, at least not water that wouldn't make us seriously ill. Mayor Hansen clucked his tongue and pulled out a gallon milk container filled with water off his quad. Matthew helped Jessie limp over and onto the four-wheeler. Phew! Mayor Hansen cried out. You stink, Jessie. Yeah, that's not all dirt on his clothes, Matthew said. I'm not the only one covered in poo, Jessie muttered. At least I don't also have Twinkie filling all over me. Mayor Hansen handed the jug to Rossi. You kids die walking back to town without water. Rossi looked at me, her eyes filled with urgency. I took a deep breath. More like running.